Welcome to the Nutrition Mission Podcast.
This is where we're going to share information about nutrition and have insights into your own personal needs, as well as product information, as well as other information. You've got to be part of this nutrition mission.
This is the official Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market podcast. And we've been helping people live better lives since 1972. We're on a nutrition mission. Join us.
All right, hey, Starkie Sours back with you today on Nutrition Mission Podcast from Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market. Today, I'm going to talk about the Bulletproof Diet. And so remember, I talked earlier about episodes that were up and coming about like maybe picking apart a specific diet. So I want to talk about the Bulletproof Diet. I'll be honest with you. I love the guy's book. I've read it twice now. By the way, I'm going to refer to notes kind of periodically. I don't want to miss anything on this, so I just want to make sure that I'm really clear on it. So I just want to set the stage about the Bulletproof Diet. By the way, if you're in LA or California, make the journey to either to Venice Beach or Santa Monica Beach. You want to go to the Bulletproof Cafe. I've been there. In fact, I'm going to go next week. I love their food. Their food tastes amazing. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Dave Asprey, and we're going to talk about his book, The Bulletproof Book and the Bulletproof Diet, and just also bulletproof coffee. You might be drinking bulletproof coffee and don't even know where it came from. So we're going to talk about that as well too. And then we'll talk about some of the supplements and some of the things that he's created and put out there on the market and the purpose. And he's got all sorts of new things and stuff like that. So first of all, let's talk about Dave Asprey. He ends up being a multimillionaire in his early 20s, living in Silicon Valley. All right. So kind of a fun moment. And so basically he gets to the point where he's got all this cash and he realizes his health is so poor, he basically can't even enjoy the money that he's got. So he's like weighing 300 pounds, going to the doctor, doing the diabetic diet, doing this diet, doing all these other different things. Literally he starts restricting his calories down to 1,800, 1,500, starts kind of starving himself, and basically nothing is working. So this guy's like in a point where he's like got to work on a regular basis, a lot of stress, all these things going on, ends up like just like, hey, I'm a millionaire and it's useless. So the bottom line is this. As first of all, a good lesson is all the money you might try to acquire doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to have fun with that money. Then at the same time, ultimately acquiring money isn't always the number one goal. But in his situation, I think it just became a passion. He just got interested and just jammed into, working with some healthcare companies and creating software and do all sorts of different things. So I want you to think of this guy's thinking and logic. So he's a computer, genius engineer. So he comes up with these words that he kind of applied to nutrition, and ultimately they've really kind of stuck. So one of the words he talked about was biohacking. And so biohacking has become like a word that's, commonly being used in the industry. And so what does biohacking mean? So basically what biohacking means is this. What you're trying to do is find out your own genetic potential. You're trying to find out your own genetic needs, so to speak. And we've talked about this before with the metabolic diet and things of that nature. And so one of the things that happened is he was just on this quest of like, okay, look, I've tried all these things, trying to get healthy. Nothing's working. I'm going to try everything. Okay, so he goes into this biohack mode. He starts doing the Atkins diet. He starts doing the zone diet. He starts doing the keto diet. He does all these different diets and ultimately says, you know what? And he also did raw, vegan, vegetarian. He literally went to Tibet and tried to discover different things in Tibet and just toured the world doing all this different stuff. And so ultimately he comes back and he starts putting things back kind of together. And he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the Bulletproof Diet, because basically it's bulletproof. It works for me. And if it works for me, what we're going to do is we're going to try working on other people. So that said, one of the things that he did was this. In his moment, he also did chemistry, blood chemistry tests. He also did things such as neurological tests to actually test different foods to see if those foods were actually working for his brain. So if he used, hypothetically, let's say he used a bunch of sugar foods, then he'd go in and do some biohacking on his brain, and they say, okay, hey, your frontal lobe performance is down 25% or 50%. That food is not good for you. So whatever you ate, that's a no-go. Tomorrow we'll try this. And so he tried all different types of substances on himself and basically found out, hey, certain foods work great, certain foods didn't. So what he started to do is started kind of tweaking things. And one thing that he did too, and in fact, I've got it with me here. By the way, you can go on the net. I think you can pull this off. This ends up being his food chart. He basically tells you how to stay on a system to lose weight, and we'll talk more about the system in a minute. He also talks about food choices. And so, for instance, let's just do this for the fun of it. Let's look at meat. By the way, meat is on his diet, so that's one of his things so that he puts. And so one of the things he does, he talks about bulletproof. Like, this is the good type of foods that you don't want to eat. And then this is what they call, what he calls suspect and then toxic, right? So let's look at the protein foods. He said, let's see. Upgraded whey protein ends up being a bulletproof product. Bulletproof collagen. He recommends collagen. The other thing he also recommends too is grass-fed beef and lamb. The other thing he hits on is eggs that basically are unpasteurized. He also talks about colostrum and other different things. So then let's go down the list. He says this is going to be questionable, right? So factory farmed eggs and pasteurized chicken and turkey. So then you go down all the way to the bottom. He's like, okay, here's what he calls toxic proteins on his diet. Soy protein, wheat protein, beans, cheese, and other pasteurized cooked dairy products with the exception of butter. So he's got his good and he's got his bad list and everything like that. And so what he basically does is say, hey, try to stay 70% on the good stuff. And then the other stuff, or 100% when you're trying to do the diet. And then if you kind of slip some of those foods in, kind of pay attention to them, maybe they're going to make you feel worse or better. All right. So that was kind of one of the things he did. Now, with that said, the guy loses 100 pounds the first year. Boom. All right. So then at the same time, he's eating more calories, he's eating more fats and doing all the different things that, obviously we're told not to do. And so remember, one of the things that happens with the metabolic typing diet is kind of puts you in a group, whether you're a carbohydrate eater, whether you're a mixed type, or whether you're a protein eater. This guy, in my opinion, is probably definitely an Eskimo, a protein eater and a fat eater for sure. All right. So loses 100 pounds, basically gets on the deal, starts writing the book. So one of the cruxes, though, that he did was this. He went, when he was in Tibet, he actually knows, by the way, my daughter's been to Tibet, and she said this is a reality. So in Tibet, what they would do is they would take their coffee, and what they would do is they actually would blend butter with it. And so they get it from yaks oftentimes. And so yak was the source, and they would blend it with butter or put butter in it. And they also had coconut oil, which is one of the staples that they would cook with. And they put the coconut oil in. And, of course, actually, we call that modern-day creamer, right? And so anyways, they would take that, shake it up, and that's what they would drink with breakfast or for breakfast oftentimes. And this is one of the cruxes of his bulletproof diet. And that's where the bulletproof coffee came from, so to speak. All right? So let's kind of pick through this. There's a little technical moment, and then we'll kind of come up for air. So obviously this guy's riddled with inflammation. He's got brain issues. He can't think, can't enjoy his life. He's hundreds of pounds over, 100 pound plus overweight. So he starts digging in. He starts looking at these foods, and he starts kind of scientifically picking these things apart. All right, so let's kind of pick these things apart because you're probably hearing a lot of this stuff on the internet anyway, so I thought I would cover it. Lectins. Everyone's heard about lectins, okay? And lectins are like a protein compound that kind of mixes with a fiber. And what they do is they kind of disrupt protein digestion. The biggest probably negative problem that you end up with lectins is this. They kind of jack with the intestinal lining, all right? So how do you get rid of lectins? Well, ultimately, really, to be honest with you, and we're going to talk about phytates. We're also going to talk about oxalates. We're also going to talk about mold toxins. But the phytates, the oxalates, and the lectins, the dominant way to get rid of these things, you've got to soak your grains. You've got to soak your beans. Because if you're not doing that, those lectins won't break down. And by the way, if you look back in indigenous cultures, you look back in the Pottinger Price Institute, and you look at the books that are written in those moments, a lot of those things, what they were saying, those indigenous people, this is what the things that they were doing. In the United States, that's not fast enough. Sprouting food, sprouting grains, gets rid of phytic acids. So what happens there? So we actually are fortunate. We're literally probably 12 miles where I'm standing today. We've got the Food for Life factory over in Corona, and they literally sprout all the grains and all the wheat and everything they've got to where it's digestible, and they make breads, and it's called Ezekiel. They also have what they call Food for Life. They've got English muffins. They've got 7-grain breads. They've got all these different things, like a phenomenal story right there. So if you want to eat bread and do those things, that's the way that you're going to be able to do it. All right, so what he does, though, he says, look, these things disrupt digestion. Beans, nuts, and grains all have these substances. So, hey, let's just kill them. Let's get rid of them. As you noticed on the negative on the list, he's like, Obviously, soy protein is not on everyone's favorite list nowadays, but wheat protein, beans, cheese, other things that are pasteurized in a can, stuff like that, ends up being a no-go. So then he says you got to watch out for phytates. So what are phytates? Phytates block certain mineral absorptions, things of that nature. And ultimately what happens with the phytates, he says, that's got to go. So those are seeds and grains, peanuts, chickpeas, nuts, seeds, etc. That means your hummus and everything's got to be chucked. By the way, we end up having in the stores, Vinny, the guy who makes it, garlic company, basically ultimately ends up making a chickpea hummus that's a dip, and he sprouts his chickpeas. So there are abilities to kind of work around this. All right, so that said, he says let's go after the oxalates as well too. The oxalates, he noticed, actually cause muscle weakness. And so in this muscle weakness, he said let's get rid of these foods. Now here's the hit list on this, all right? So here's the big hit list. By the way, especially when it comes to vegetables, the way to get rid of these oxalates is to cook them or basically bake them, all right? So here comes the hit list. Kale. I mean, how many people have almost started a religion over kale, right? It's crazy. Kale is like the savior of the planet, right? Because it's got all these nutrients, things of that nature. So ultimately, kale ends up on this list, right? Chard, spinach, buckwheat, cauliflower, broccoli. So all these cruciferous vegetables that are supposed to be good for us, here's what we know. If you're not cooking them, you're probably not dumping some of these oxalates. They're a little bit ultimately hard to digest. And mind you might experience that. Some people don't have that. Some people do. All right, so obviously steam the vegetables, soak the vegetables. So I have a tendency to like a spinach omelet. So what I do is I actually cook the spinach real quick. By the way, you can take 2 fists of spinach, almost like a whole bag of spinach, throw it in, saute it down, and literally ends up being just enough to stuff an omelet up. So put that together, and boom, you got a spinach omelet. You've got the oxalates out of the scene, and you reduce these lectin possibilities as well too. All right, so let's talk about mold toxins. Mold toxins are literally everywhere. So let's say you go, we've all heard of black mold, right? So you live at the beach or in the beach area, these black molds ultimately can get in, from the moisture. So what happens is, let's say you've got a leak in the roof and it gets into the walls. And so in the walls, what it does is it creates this moisture, and then you get black mold toxin. And then all of a sudden everyone's in the house more sick than usual. So once I actually had a leak in my kitchen, and I finally said, I got to get in and deal with this. I had black mold everywhere. By the way, it's easy to clean up. Most people call a company. So my dad's a general contractor. Hey, what you got to do is you got to, mask off the place, get some bleach water, clean it up, do the thing, get rid of it. So I did that. And so then air it out the house, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Typically, like I said, a lot of times people will call somebody and have them come in and do this, and it's expensive, obviously. So ultimately, mold toxins, and people are sensitive to mold toxins. Not everybody, but ultimately probably about 28% of the population, 30% of the population is sensitive to mold toxins. So here's the big caveat is this. By the way, real quick, mold toxins cause cardiovascular disease issues, as well as hypertension, kidney disorders, brain damage, as well as immune damage, all these other different things that are in there. All right, so here's the deal. He kind of focuses coffee as one of the primary things to use as a start of the day, to not only give you energy to wake up the brain, but also, and we're going to see this actually propel you through a moment where you're going to intermittent fast up until 2:00 in the afternoon. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. So ultimately, let's get back to this. So his coffee ends up being this crux of his existence. He's went to Tibet, got all this coffee thing, and this is his world. He loves coffee. By the way, my daughter runs a barista. She's a barista, and she manages a cafe here in town. Coffee is amazing for those that do well with it. I don't do well with it. I wish I did, actually. I love the smell. All right, so anyways, that thought is this. Coffee actually ends up having a fair amount of mold toxins in it. All right, so typically it's bad processing, cracked beans, things of that nature. These different substances actually kind of create a situation, especially if it's stored too long and harvested improperly in wet conditions, all these different things that come up. If these molds get in there, then what happens is, there's a level of molds, and they will test this as it's being imported into the country. Well, the government has a amount that it'll take. It's there's mold toxins, but it's at a threshold of this. Okay, we'll let it in. Or if it's over, okay, it's kicked out. I don't know what the threshold is. I'm not really interested in the threshold. I'm not in the coffee bean processing business. But ultimately, bottom line is this. He was noticing that he was having mold toxin issues. So because he was having these mold toxin issues, he decided what he was going to do is make sure that he put out a coffee company that had no mold toxins. So he's actually not only processing it differently, he puts it in a situation that guarantees that those mold toxins aren't there. Kind of a cool gig, right? So here's this billionaire guy, and now all of a sudden he's doing this biohacking. Now he's in a situation where he wants to lose weight. He wants to do all these different things, and he says, hey, coffee's a problem. Hey, guess what? I'm going to fix the coffee. So he gets in. By the way, other people have done this, but he does the deal, and he puts it together. All right, so then he starts digging in and saying, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scientifically kind of look at this diet and talk a little bit about it. So he says, here's the deal. Ultimately, what he's going to do, he thinks, I've got to also look at my hormones. He's been paying attention to his hormones. And I'm not just talking about the progesterones, the estrogens, the testosterones, things of that nature. His crux and biggest crux, he was looking at the GI hormones. So you have a whole set of GI and systemic hormones. So for instance, let's say you miss a meal or 2 meals, or all of a sudden you're like going, I'm hungry. Believe it or not, your gut actually produces a hormone. It's called ghrelin. And what it does is it talks to the brain. It says, hey, butthead, why don't you wake up and give me some food? Because I'm freaking hungry down here, so let's do something, right? So ghrelin actually kind of like wakes that brain up and gets you that moment where you're just like going, oh my gosh, I got to actually, go eat some food. By the way, make healthy food choices, right? So the other one is leptin. So where does leptin come from? It comes from the fat cells. And what it basically does, and let's say you eat a meal and the body takes the blood sugar and starts moving around, doing its thing, stuff like that. And then after a while, the excessive stuff starts kind of kicking into the fat cells. It kind of hits the fat cells. And the fat cells basically say, hey, send up that leptin hormone up to the brain and tell them, hey, we're good. We got enough food. Stop eating, right? So what happens, we know this for a fact. Individuals that have a propensity or a tendency to be obese have less leptin. So the brain doesn't shut off. It's really cool. Like back in the 80s, there was this guy who came into our store, and he was a world-class tennis player. And he didn't look like a world-class tennis player. He'd probably put on an extra 150 pounds. So we get talking to the guy, and he was working out in extreme heat conditions for a long period of time down in Palm Springs, where the tennis capital of the world is, doing his thing, boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden, he literally has almost like a snap go off in his brain. His doctor basically said, look, here's the deal. The hypothalamus, which is the center of the brain that collects these messengers, in the reticular activating system, all these technical words, right, basically gets these messengers, and all of a sudden, you're not getting these shut-off messengers anymore. So this guy's just hungry 24/7. So he ends up putting on 150 pounds, and we kind of worked with the guy for years and stuff like that, coming in the door. It seemed like after a while, he kind of got calmed back down and kind of back in place. But anyways, one of the things that happens is this. Ultimately, in this situation, these hormones are kind of going to regulate your hunger. All right, so here's another couple of little caveats is this. So let's look at this. Let's look at cortisone. Cortisone is secreted out of the adrenal glands. And what it does is it increases blood sugar and cravings. When we're under stress, cortisone flies through the ceiling. And it tells us, hey, eat, and that'll settle us down for various reasons. Obviously, what it does, one of the things that cortisone does, it's the feel-good hormone when we're stressed out. So we're stressed out, it pumps it up, and then it says, hey, eat more foods. The other thing it does is kind of pumps out blood sugar out into the bloodstream. The other thing that happens as well, it has a tendency to kind of start playing with insulin. And so then insulin rises up and it lowers it down. But where's insulin going to stuff all this food that is pumping out of the muscle and puts it back into fat? So it's literally like converting your muscle into fat. It's really kind of crazy how it works. So he realizes that this is a biohack that needs to be done. So what he does is this. He says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this diet that kind of calms these hormones down, especially from him being in a situation of very, very strong obesity. He's like, I'm going to calm these things down. And what he did is he did this. He kicks off the whole idea of intermittent fasting. So this intermittent fasting kind of ends up becoming like one of the things that he wants to do. He basically says, I'm going to start doing this intermittent fasting. And what it's going to do, it's going to kind of control these hormones, so to speak, and kind of get these things back in check. And so this is one of the big biohacks that he actually did. He created this situation of intermittent fasting. So one of the things he did, he said, let's take the bulletproof coffee. So we can do the coffee. Let's put in the MCT oils. By the way, MCT oils, he specifically used a coconut oil that's kind of a spectrum. And then one of the things he also did is pulled out one of the spectrum. What I mean by spectrum is various different oils in there, C8, C4, C10, C12s. He pulls out C8. Why does he pull out C8? Well, C8 is a specific fat that comes out of coconut oil, and it just ignites the brain. It makes you think clear. It puts you in a situation where you feel like mentally alert, and it quiets down the need for the brain to need glucose. So it starts calming these hormones down. So he adds these things together. So you've got some caffeine, you've got the C8 hitting the brain, and these hormones start to calm down with this intermittent fasting from like 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, and then you eat 2 meals, all right? So that was one of his big crux that he actually did in his biohack moment. And so ultimately what he ended up saying was like, this was one of the game changers for him being in a situation of being overweight, all right? All right, so let's talk about some more stuff, all right? So some of the things of the diet, kind of just digging some of the myths and things of that nature. One of the things that he got sick of was this. He got sick of people telling me this: you're not trying hard enough. You don't have enough willpower. You know, you've got all these other different factors that they tell you. You know, like, you're not as hungry as you think you are. You know, you do the low-fat diet. It's the healthy diet. You want to cut the calories. You want to train really hard and do all these other different things. Well, ultimately what he was seeing in his body, by cutting the calories, training harder, putting himself in a situation where he was trying to lower the fat, do all these things, it was worse. His insulin was climbing. His leptin levels had leptin resistance, to where basically his body wasn't producing it and wasn't recognizing it. And so ultimately he says, I've got to hack this. And so that was the idea of like change in the diet. So ultimately, we got to kind of look at some things that are kind of interesting here. He comes back through and he does this. He says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the biohack in the morning, do the intermittent fasting. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat all the meat I want, all the vegetables I want, all the oils that I want, and a little bit of fruit at night as my dessert. 2 meals. And if you need 3 meals, do 3 meals. But basically what you're going to do, you're going to eat between 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock at night, and eat all that you basically need to eat for the most part. Mind you, don't be stupid, but eat all that you need to eat. So he recommended doing this for 2 weeks to biohack this hormone system and get the body back in check. So then once you're back in check, he basically goes back to, okay, what you're going to do, for like a maintenance, a diet, and ultimately like maybe a diet to help to keep you losing weight. You're going to do the coffee in the morning up until 2 o'clock. Still, you're only going to eat fruit in the afternoon, but you're going to eat meat, you're going to eat oils, you're going to eat vegetables all day long. And you're good to go. So then here's the crux is this. He basically kind of hits a keto style. He says, look, I want you to get about 60%, maybe 70% of your diet ultimately ends up coming from fats, so healthy fats all day long. Then the other thing he wants you to do is eat about 20%, 20% in proteins, and roughly about 5% of carbs. And so put you in a situation where you're not only getting a large amount of calories, but it's from fat, and your body's kind of in a situation of being satiated. All right, so ultimately starts losing weight. Everyone starts kicking in. So he starts selling the concepts, quote unquote, to other different people. They love it. Literally started a craze. As we see sitting in front of us, I've got a couple different things. We're going to go through it. I want to make sure, though, that I've gone through all the notes and make sure that I've got this accurate. I feel like for a guy that's done all this homework and done all this work, I want to make sure that I present this information properly. All right, so it looks like I've covered everything. By the way, when it came to the different types of fish, he always recommended a low mercury fish, grass-fed beef, pasture-aged, pastured milk products. So you're in a situation where they're not pasteurized, but they're raised in like grass-fed situations, things of that nature. I think I mentioned that earlier. And collagen and gelatin and whey is on his list as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. So let's say that you're doing the bulletproof coffee in the morning. So you hit the bulletproof coffee, then you're throwing in the MCT oils, you're throwing in the butter or the ghee, which he recommends. Ultimately what happens, he also says, put some collagen in. Why collagen? First of all, it's good for gut lining. It's good for digestion. It's also good to kind of like help strengthen the body's ability to be able to kind of forego a couple of things. Number one, when you look at collagen, it's a low glycemic index protein. What I mean by that is this: it doesn't cause insulin raises whatsoever. So that was one of the things that he recommended. So you're getting protein, doesn't hit the insulin up. He also recommended whey protein. So I brought with me a fun whey protein from Natural Factors. This particular one is grass-fed, hormone-free, et cetera, et cetera. This one definitely hits the list when it comes to all the things that he tabbed out. And he also recommended, if you need to, put in the whey protein. So this is going to help you be able to get through that intermittent fasting moment. All right? Okay, now let's get some other products out. We'll kind of give you a little bit of things. By the way, he's really gone AWOL. He recently just came out with the pods, so you can put in your Keurig. By the way, I don't know what a Keurig is, but I made Mike Barnett, our advertising director, some coffee yesterday. We were talking about this on some Instagram stuff. So I actually used a Keurig for the first time in my life. Then he's also got like an espresso one. And then he's also got a bar that he puts out. These bars are amazing. You can take these bars, eat them in between meals if you're going to miss a meal. So it's got cashew proteins or cashew nuts. It's got MCT oil. At the same time, it's got collagen protein in it and a couple other different things that actually keep you satiated for a good period of time. It's roughly, if I remember, about 200 and some odd calories. Let me just take another real quick look here on the calories so I can make sure that's right. Yeah, so it ends up being 190 calories, so about 200 calories. So at least it's going to hold you over for a period of time. All right, so what do you do if you want to go from there? Let's say you know what, Stark, this sounds like fun. I'd like to try it. Remember that anytime you do a diet, it's always good to check with your doc, tell them what you're doing. He might tell you, hey, don't do it, whatever the case might be. Do some research on your own. Get online, watch some videos. Go down to the cafe. The other thing I recommend is this. I literally think this one page of information when it comes to his diet, if you studied this, you would literally know almost everything that you need to do when it comes to diet. It's very simple. It's just laid out in these little bullet things, and it kind of lets you know exactly how to do it. It doesn't really have any recipes or anything with that, but the book does, and he's also got a cookbook to round it up. All right, so we delved in. We know a little bit about the Bulletproof Diet, more than we did before. And like I said, I read the book twice, and I feel like this is a great product combination usage formula that you could try and actually see a difference. Is it something that's going to sustain you all your life? It might be. A lot of people, like I was saying, when we look at that metabolic typing or the protein types, they'll do well with this. Carb types might not do well with it, might have to tweak some things with it to work with it, but it kind of gives you a little bit of idea, and also gives you a little idea where the intermittent fasting thing came from. All right, so that kind of wraps up this session. Stay in tune for the next couple of sessions coming up, and we'll have more information about other diets in the future.
Thank you guys for joining us today on our Mission Nutrition podcast, the official Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market podcast. We've got another exciting episode for you next week, so be sure to review, subscribe, follow us, and stay connected.
Absolutely, be part of it. We've got so much we're going to share with you. It's going to be an amazing ride.
We'll see you next time.